My love of cars probably began when I was about 15 years old, and whilst at school in Derbyshire, one day I hitched a lift in an E-Type Jaguar. I remember the roar of the engine, the laminated wood steering wheel, and the sheer exhilaration of its acceleration. The nearest I got to owning an E-Type in my youth was a Barclay three-wheeler with a 3-cylinder 2-stroke engine. But the thing about my entry to cars was that I was able to drive a three-wheeler on a motorcycle licence and only needed one car driving lesson for my test, and that was to learn how to use a reverse gear. As a young student at Shoreditch College in London, I paid £135 for a 1933 Morgan three-wheeler. Gorgeous young females from neighbouring colleges would phone me up asking for a ride in it. If I picked them up in the evening in the dark, I would guide them into the passenger seat by walking them around the front of the car to disguise the fact it only had 3 wheels. But actually, that wasn't necessary, as it was such a gorgeous beast in itself. In fact, the Morgan was ahead of its time, and one of my dreams has been to build a lightweight plywood three-wheeler using a motorcycle engine and the single wheel at the back, as this offers great road holding. Well, sadly one day as a young student I managed to wrap my Moggy around a lamppost in Windsor when I went to see Georgie Fame and Alan Price perform at the Star and Garter. When I bought it, it was painted British Racing Green, and I repainted it in yellow by hand, as though it wasn't noticeable enough. I would turn up at my first school teaching job in London and the kids went mad over it. I also owned at that time a couple of Ford-powered Morgan three-wheelers, and I think paid about £100 each for them. But sadly, I had nowhere to park these fabulous vehicles other than on the road, and so I sold them, one of my biggest regrets. I then embarked on my love affair with minis and bought an 850 Mini for £70 from an ex-pupil from the London school. Now the Mini was revolutionary in the way it handled, and the fact you could customise the car in so many ways kept a generation of youths occupied. Throughout my 20s and early 30s I owned no less than 13 Minis, mostly Coopers. I had a 998 Cooper, the most economic of all, a 1071S that could see off an E-Type up to 60, and a 1275S which had a better top-end speed. I even had a mini pickup which we'd all pile into and go down to the river for summer picnics. Of all my Minis I had 7 stolen and 1 returned 4 times, invariably vandalised. They were such hot cars, and I customised them with wide alloy wheels, wood dashboards and extra instruments. For a brief period I owned a TVR Grand Tourer and put a new 1800cc MGB engine in it. I was driving down to Brighton one day and a rear wheel flew off and overtook me, and that's another story. I did some work on the GRP body and moulded in some extra spotlights. It was a bit of a pig to drive and tended to take up 2 lanes of the motorway trying to keep it in a straight line. Little wonder the rear wheel came off. Another car I had was a Citroën 2CV, which I paid 50 quid for, and this was an entirely different experience. It rolled gently around corners and would build up huge queues of traffic behind it. I'd go on camping trips in it. I put a new 600cc engine in it, painted it, and then got bored as I did and sold it on. I then began to take an interest in kit cars and bought a Dutton Sierra which had a 1300cc Ford Escort engine. This was my family car, as at the time I had a girlfriend who had 2 young children, and we drove to Ireland in it where I was teaching. On the way over, a lorry startled a herd of cows and one landed up on the bonnet of my Dutton. When I described this to a police officer later, he said, "Did you manage to get the number of the cow?" The GTM was the first and only kit car I built from scratch. It had a Mini Cooper S engine. It was difficult to build. In fact, I think if you could build a GTM, you could build any car. Oh yes, I went to Australia in 1986 and bought a mini moat to get around in. Whilst in Sydney, I met a woodworker who'd built a go-kart entirely out of Australian woods.
The chassis is in myrtle, Tasmanian myrtle. The roll bars and suspension are in silver ash.
Yes.
The wheels, the tyres are Queensland walnut. The wheels themselves are Huon pine.
Yes.
Wheel nuts, rosewood or rose mahogany.
It's an amazing rack and pinion. Does all this work?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and so does the brake. There's a little brake pedal there.
Now, this car I didn't actually own, but I helped restore it over a few years, replacing a lot of the woodwork and repainting it by hand, building up several coats to get a good finish. For a while I reminisced over my Morgan student days and bought this Morgan replica called a JZR. Jezza is my nickname. I had intended to work on it, but again had nowhere really to keep it dry, so I sold that on. In 2001 I set eyes on a red car flashing around the Castlecombe race circuit, and I said, I want that. I bought the prototype Raffo Belva designed by John Raffo. It had a 2-litre Vauxhall Calibre engine and was very quick. I regretted selling it in 2002, but in 2009 I managed to track down Raffo Belva number 7. There were about 8 built, I think, and I now own this car, and it is my current project for putting a more efficient engine in, redesigning the interior and rewiring it, possibly putting some bigger wheels on. This will keep me busy, and this time I intend to keep it. Well, I was very fortunate to grow up in an era when there were lots of really interesting enthusiast cars on the road. I hope you've enjoyed this brief history of some, but by no means all of the cars I've owned. I have to say my one regret is that I did not marry a beautiful rich woman who had a giant garage on her estate.